Hello everybody and welcome to this NatCen ESS City University Methods Seminar. I'm delighted to welcome today Melanie Revilla from the Pompeu Fabra University, who's going to be talking about web survey participation of millennials. How does it differ from older cohorts and what could help us to improve it? So without further ado, let me hand over to Melanie. If you have any questions, then please put these in the Q&A and Melanie will talk for around 40 minutes or so, and then we'll take questions from there. Thank you very much. Over to you, Melanie.
Hi everybody, and thank you very much for inviting me to present some of my work today. Let me share my slides. Okay. Can you see it?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So I'm very happy to present today something about the research I've been doing about web survey participation of millennials. The talk will be divided in two main parts. In the first one, I will present some results of a study that is co-authored by Jan Olne, in which we compare millennials to older age cohorts in terms of different aspects of their web survey participation, using data from the CRONOS and the G panel. And then in the second part, I will try to propose some ideas of how we could engage further millennials in survey participation. And I will go through some evidence to see if these ideas are supported or not in practice. Since I'm not presenting just one study, but different ones, there are different fundings, sources, and different people that help me in the presentation, as you can see the slides. So I would like to thank in particular Oyol, Jan, Patricia, and Carlos for their help. So first, why focusing on millennials? Well, there is for a few years already a large interest, mainly in market research, for focusing on millennials, because they are supposed to be different and they are supposed to be changing the game. So it is said that they are very important age cohort and that companies should engage further with them. So you can see all these kind of topics if you look at websites or on internet. So there is this idea that this is a generation that is different from the other one, and that they think differently, and that we also need to approach them differently. And in particular, millennials have been defined as the age cohort that is born between 82 and 2003. Sometimes it's 81, it depends. Here I'm using the definition of Strauss and Howell. And therefore this age cohort is specific because they have been, during their formative years, living specific events that are different from the one that have been lived by the other age cohorts, which are the Generation X, people born between 61 and 81, the boomers born between 43 and 60, and the silents that were born before 43. So millennials would be different, and in particular, they would be different in terms of communication style. So there is previous research that shows that the communication skills of millennials seems to be of lower quality than those of older age cohorts, and also that millennials have higher affinity towards computer-mediated communication tools. And this is a research already from 2010, but if we think now 10 years later, probably it's not just computer-mediated, but all new technology-oriented communication tools. And this would be related mainly to the fact that millennials have been the first age cohort to have internet access during their formative years. And due to that, they have highest technology exposure. It has also been found that millennials process website information 5 times faster than other older age cohorts. So it means that they have really skills to process the information from the internet. And all of this makes possible that if they are different in terms of their communication style and in terms of their relation to new technologies, it should also be different when it comes to web survey participation. So in particular, if they are quicker in processing web information, well, this could make easier for them to answer web survey questions. And if they need different kind of communication style, different kinds of layouts to be attracted, it might also be that the way conventional surveys are normally designed is not fitting that well for this generation. So overall, we can expect that the decision to participate in web survey, or the level of record, the data quality, or the survey evaluation will differ between millennials and older age cohorts. In order to look at this, there is already a lot of research that is considering age as a control variable. This is actually one of the most common control variables in most of the studies out there. But there is not much literature that is really focusing on age cohorts. But if we follow the logics of the topic of millennials, in principle, the effect of age would not be just something that is the older you are and the more different you are, but it will really be that there is an identity of millennials that has been created because they shared these formative years and common events during these formative years. And because of that, they would be different. So we wanted to do some research, really dividing into the different age cohorts and looking if the web participation to web survey is different or not when we compare millennials to these older age cohorts. So we did a first study with some colleagues in which we analyzed the participation, the break-off, the proportion of survey answered with smartphone, and a question about survey evaluation that in that case was a 1 to 5 question in which respondents are asked to evaluate overall how they think about the survey. And in that case, to compute these rates, what we did is use data from an opt-in panel, that is the NatWest opt-in panel, and we used data from the panels in 8 different countries, Portugal and Spain for the European countries, and then countries for Central and Latin America. And we have a huge number of panelists, as you can see on the slide, because we used really all the surveys programmed by this online fieldwork company during around 1 year. And the main findings in a very summarized way, so if you want more information, the paper is published, we find that there is a significant lower participation rate for millennials compared to the older age cohorts. And we also find a significant higher proportion of survey answered through smartphones for millennials. In terms of break-off and survey evaluation, we almost didn't find any difference, but we have 8 countries, so this is overall, but we do find some specific differences. So in order to go further, we did a follow-up study together with Jan. That is the one that I want to explain a bit more in detail in this first part. So in this study, we built on the one I just presented, but we extend the research in different ways. And in particular, we focus now on probability-based panels. 2 of them, the CRONOS panel that was implemented in Estonia, Slovenia, and the UK, and the JIP panel that, as the name indicates, German Internet panel, was implemented in Germany. We thought that by using probability-based panel, results could be quite different from what was observed in the first study, because in the case of probability-based panel, the process of inviting the people to the survey is quite different from opt-in panel. So usually all the panelists are invited to all the waves instead of in opt-in panel selecting subsamples in function of the target population and of the need of the panel. The incentives are normally also much higher. The number of surveys they reserved are much lower. So overall, even if we expect similar trends, we thought that we could find different results. Also because we are looking at different countries. We tried to improve somehow the first research also in different ways, first in looking at data quality, also in controlling for potential confounders, and in using questions for survey evaluations that are more specific, so about the difficulty of answering the survey and if they liked to answer the survey. We proposed a set of different hypotheses. So compared to older age cohorts, we expect millennials to have a lower participation rate, higher break-off rate, and higher proportion of smartphone. So these hypotheses are similar to the first study, and the one and the third actually find support. The second one didn't find support before, but we still want to test if it's in different contexts we do find or not support. Then we have two hypotheses about the fact that millennials will find the survey less difficult and they would like it more. The basis for this hypothesis is this idea that millennials are more technology oriented. And finally, in terms of data quality, we made the hypothesis that we would have similar levels because we had arguments to think that the quality could be increased and decreased. So the quality could be increased for millennials because they are more technologically oriented. They have more skills to use the computers or the smartphones. So this should help improving data quality. But on the other hand, it has been found also that millennials have less attention span than other older age cohorts, that they do not have the same capacity of concentrating on a task. So this could decrease data quality. So because some aspects could improve and other decrease, we made the hypothesis that overall we would have similar levels. The data we used, as I said, comes from two probability-based panels, the CRONOS panel implemented in Estonia, Slovenia, and the UK, recruited respondents at the end of the European Social Survey round 8, and respondents that didn't have the possibility to connect to internet were provided with a tablet and internet access. The data collection was a bit more than 1 year. So we had a welcome survey first and then 6 waves of data that each were about 20 minutes of questions. And the number of panelists is between 700 and 920 more or less, depending on the country. On the other side, in the JIP panel, the samples were drawn already in 2012. Here again, people that didn't have internet access were provided with a PC-like device in that case, so that they could connect to internet and participate in the panel. And the data collection is going on since 2012, but to make our data comparable to the CRONOS panel, we focused on 6 waves that were implemented in 2017, and we have a bit more than 3,200 panelists. So in order to do our analysis, first what we did is compute some individual rates. So for each panelist, we computed the participation rate as the number of times they started a survey divided by the number of times they were invited to a survey. Then we had the break-off rate, number of times they started but did not finish the survey compared to the ones they were starting. Then we have the rate of a smartphone survey, which are the number of times they used the smartphone to answer a survey divided by the number of times they started. And then we have difficult and liked rates that are the number of difficult survey or liked survey. So what they reported, if they like it or if they find it difficult, divided by the number of times they answered the question about difficulty or about liking the survey. And finally, we have 2 indicators of data quality, which are the rate of non-substantive response, so for instance, don't know answers, and the rate of selecting the first answer, so first answer category. So these are computed as the number of non-substantive response or the number of times they select the first answer divided by the number of questions that were asked. For each of these individual rates, what we did is take the average per age cohort, panel, and country, and then we compare the different age cohorts and we test if there are significant difference between the millennial cohort and the older age cohorts. And because we expect actually that there is a confounding effect coming from the participation through smartphones, since this is our 4th hypothesis, now we expect that millennials will use more smartphone, but there is also literature that suggests that when you participate through a smartphone instead of a PC, this could affect, for instance, the break-off rate or the survey evaluation. So to control for this confounding effect, we also ran OLS regression, in which the dependent variables are the rates that I just explained, except the one of smartphone survey that is used as a control variable. We also control for gender, education, employment status, citizenship, and country. And when they are not the dependent variable, we control for difficult and liked rates. So what are the results? Well, in terms of descriptive analysis, I'm not presenting all the tables. They are in the paper if you're interested. I will just give you a very brief overview of what we find. So we do find support for the idea that there is a lower participation rate for millennial. We find a higher break-off rate in 2 of the countries, but not in the other 2. we find a higher proportion of smartphone surveys. But we do not find that millennials find it less difficult, and we do not find that they like it more. In terms of data quality, we do find overall a similar quality across the different age cohorts. Now, if we move to the regression analyses, which are probably more important, since here we control for the socio-demographic variables, but also and mainly for the smartphone rate, what we can see is that in terms of participation, when we have millennials as a reference category, and then we have a dummy variable for each of the three other cohorts, so for Gen X, boomers, and silents, we find positive significant effect in both panels. So it means that indeed the participation is lower for millennials than for the other age cohorts. We also find support in that case for our second hypothesis about break-off. Here we find that we have negative significant coefficient for all age cohorts and in both panels. Regarding the difficult rate, we do not find any support in the JIP. Actually, we have two significant coefficients, but they are in the opposite direction as the one expected. And in the CRONOS, we have only one significant coefficient, but it is at least in the expected direction. Regarding the fact that they like participating in the survey, we do not find any significant effect in the case of the CRONOS, but we do find two negative significant effects for the JIP. And finally, in terms of data quality, we actually find that most of the effects are significant. So it's against our hypothesis that we have similar data quality. So if we try to sum up what we have seen in this study, well, we do find lower participation rates for millennials, both when we look at the descriptive analysis and at the regression. In terms of break-off, it seems also that it is higher for millennials. In the descriptive analysis, it's only in 2 out of the 4 countries, but when we do the regression, we do find significant negative effect in both panels for all age cohorts. We also find higher smartphone rates for millennials. The results about survey evaluation and data quality, on the contrary, are quite mixed. They are different sometimes between what we see in the descriptive and in the regression, or they are different across panel, or they sometimes go in opposite direction to what we were expecting. But overall, I would say that it seems that indeed millennials do differ, at least on several aspects, to other and older age cohorts. So then in a second part of the presentation, the question is if they are different, and it seems that they are different not in a good direction. No? So the participation is lower and the break-off is higher. So we would like to find ways to engage them further. And there are different possibilities, of course, to doing that. It could be, for instance, done by trying different incentives. But the idea I want to look at today is if we can adapt the survey design such that it becomes more interesting for millennials to participate, so we can limit their break-off, or we can improve their survey evaluation and data quality. So there are different ideas that have been already proposed in previous publications, and I will look at 3 of these. So all of them are in line with this idea that maybe if we introduce new tools that better catch millennial interest and attention, we can involve millennials in survey participation better and obtain high quality answers from them. Now, the 3 tools I will consider today are the use of emojis, the use of visual data, and the use of voice recordings. Of course, we do not expect that using these tools is something that is possible for any kind of survey question. This would be for some questions. But overall, if we start introducing such tools, there is this idea that maybe we can make the whole survey more enjoyable, less burdensome, less boring, less repetitive for millennials, and that could have a positive effect on their engagement in surveys in general. So let's start with emojis. Why emojis could help? Well, actually, there are over 10 billion emojis that are sent each day, and 92% of the online population use emojis daily. So this is really a very common way of communicating all over the world. And it's normally considered as a natural and friendly way of communicating. So people do like emojis in general. According to Swift page, they found that if you include an emoji, for instance, in the subject line of an email, this increased both the open rate and the click rate by almost 30%. So if emojis are something that people are using daily and they like to use it, well, we could try to introduce it also in a web survey such that the experience in participating in survey is more similar to the normal way in which people are communicating outside of surveys. And we especially expect that emojis will work for millennials because, as I said before, they are more technology oriented. And there are some reports that are not academic research, but they are more from market research, but that do suggest this, that millennials are particularly an interesting target for using emojis. So in terms of empirical evidence, we did one study with Bosch in which we focused on millennials, and we proposed them to use emojis in survey, and we looked at different things related to that. So there are more analyses actually in the paper, but for the presentation, I focus on some of them. The first is that we asked them about their willingness to use emojis in surveys. And also we asked them their preference between scales that present emojis and more traditional conventional scales that are mainly verbal scales or other existing scales. And we also look at the possibility of using emojis in open questions. And we compare a treatment group in which we encourage millennials to use emojis and a control group in which they could use emojis, because that's always possible actually in an open question, but they were not mentioned that this was a possibility and they were not encouraged to do so. And we look at the difference in data quality and survey evaluation. So when encouraging or not to use emojis in open questions. The data we use is again from NetWest opt-in online panels, this time in Spain and Mexico. And we have around 800 respondents in both countries, and it's a smartphone online survey only. In terms of results, what we find is that around 75% of millennials say that they are willing and they would like to use emojis in Spain, and it goes up even to 88% in Mexico. And when proposed different scales, some using emojis and some not, the majority said that they prefer the scale that used emojis. And in terms of data quality in open questions, when encouraging millennials to use emojis, we find a similar item non-response, but more information conveyed. So overall, it has a positive impact on data quality and also on survey evaluation, in terms of the proportion of people who say that they like answering the survey. So overall, from this first study, it seems that millennials show interest in using emojis in survey, but of course, much more research is needed because this is just a single study in 2 specific countries using one specific opt-in panel. So we would need different topics, scales, countries, etc., to be researched as well to see if the results are robust. And also, we would need to compare millennials to other age cohorts to see if the positive effects that we seem to observe with emoji is something that is more important for millennials, or if this is something that is true in general for all respondents. No? But overall, it seems that it's quite a promising option to encourage the use of emoji or to propose emoji scales, because the cost is actually very limited. And it can be done across countries and languages, so it seems to be something worth to investigate further. Second idea is to use visual data. Visual data, and in particular images, but also videos are more and more used, are largely used outside surveys. So just to give one fact, there are more pictures that are taken nowadays every 2 minutes than during the whole 19th century. So it's very common nowadays to take pictures, to use visual data, to share visual data. And this is outside the survey world, but of course we can also include this in surveys, in web surveys. And then several benefits are expected if we propose to use visual data to answer to survey questions. Some are on the researcher side, and they are mainly related to improvement of data quality for some questions. and others are in terms of respondents' experience. So we expect that it could be more enjoyable if they can use this visual data, because they do use that outside of the survey world and they are used to it. And normally it should ask them little effort or reduced effort and time. And we do expect that especially for the millennials respondents, because as we already said, they are more oriented towards new technologies. And also it has been found actually that visual language is very popular for millennials, so they should enjoy it more. Now, in terms of evidence, we also did a study with some colleagues using millennials in Spain and Mexico. So this is the same data actually as the emoji study. At the very end of the survey, we actually add some questions in which we ask respondents to share images from their mobile. And so we could look at the actual participation. More precisely, what I will report today is the proportion of respondents that answer in line, which means that they send an image that answer really to the question, that answer not in line. So they send an image, but it was not in line with the question, that skip the question. So they just continue without providing any answer, or that mentioned that they did not understand. That was a radio button that was present on the screen. So they could say that they didn't understand how to do it. So the data, as I said, is the same as for the emoji study, but now we focus on two tasks where we ask respondents first to take and share a photo of what they saw right now during the survey completion, and second, to share a already stored image that make them laugh, that they had accessible from their smartphone. In terms of findings, what we got is that 41 to 49% of the respondents uploaded an image that was in line with the question. Around 10% uploaded an image, but that was not in line. And then 23 to 26% had difficulties in understanding, or at least reported their difficulties, because this is particularly high compared to our expectation. And so we suspect that actually some respondents may have selected this option in a way to satisfy and to not provide the data, but that they might actually know how to do it, but just didn't want to do it. And so they find an easy way out by selecting this radio button here. And we also have around 20% that skip the questions. So again, maybe an easy way to not provide the data. So it seems that the participation is actually quite low and much lower than what we were expecting. And on the contrary, the proportion stating difficulty is much higher, as I just said, that's what we were expecting. So this first study actually is not so encouraging. It seems that it's not working as well as we would like. But we need, of course, more evidence. No? And we need to compare also somehow millennials to older age cohorts to see if at least these tools, maybe at the end, they do not help improving the engagement, but if we use them, do we at least get better participation from millennials compared to other older age cohorts? So in order to compare these millennials to older age cohorts, I'm using data from different studies where we asked things about visual data, but the analyses in the published papers or presentations were not looking at age cohorts. So these are extra analyses. So first, I used data to look if respondents reported more skills and more willingness when they are millennials than when they are from older age cohorts. So I will look at the proportion and test for significance of difference across age cohorts. I used data from NetQuest again in Spain. In this time it was collected around 1 year ago, and we had around 850 respondents. So the main findings are overall as we expected in that case. So higher proportion of millennials that report having the skills and that are willing to share different types of visual data. To get more into details about these results, what we did for the different types of visual data is that we ask respondents if they had the skill to produce a screenshot from a PC, a screenshot from a smartphone, a photo from a smartphone, a video from a smartphone, and if they know how to share already stored files from a PC and from a smartphone. And what we see is that overall, the proportion of respondents that said that they have these skills in the millennial cohort is very high. except for the screenshot from a PC. It's more than 90% in all other cases, and it's sometimes really, really close to 100%. And it is also significantly higher in most cases than the numbers that are reported by the older age cohorts. So it seems that indeed millennials have better skills when it's related to producing and sharing visual data, and they also have higher willingness. So we have similar tasks here, and we see that the level of willingness is relatively high also. It goes from 50 to 70% more or less, and it's higher than the actual participation that was observed in the first survey. Actually, if we look at the photo smartphone, this is the highest one, and this is much higher than what was observed in the first study about millennials. On the contrary, when we look at the already stored image from a smartphone, this is similar to the task that we had also in the first study, and this is getting quite close from the actual participation that was observed. And we also, if we compare age cohort, we see that we have significant higher level for millennials in most of the cases compared to the older age cohorts. We also had some data from another study where we asked participants to share images. And I also use this data to compare millennials to older age cohorts in terms this time of if they like answering the question using the visual data and if they found it easy. The data in that case come from the Respondee opt-in online panel in Germany, and we had 4 questions that requested visual data, and we have here around 1,900 respondents that are analyzed. Some of them, around half, were answering from a PC and the other half from a smartphone. In that case, the results are actually not as expected. We find very low level of people that liked participating and answering the question using this visual data. And the level of easy is also quite low, and it's actually lower for millennials than for Generation X. So to see the results here, you see that for the like, we have only 11% of the respondents in the millennial cohort that said that they like, and this is actually lower, significantly lower than what we have for the older age cohorts. And in terms of easiness, we have 47% that said that they find it easy, and it's also lower than what we find for the Generation X. So here, results are really not going in the expected direction, and are really the proportion of like mainly is really low and not as we expected, which might be related to the specific topics. So we asked in particular a question of their face. So this might be something they really didn't like. It could also be related to the different panel and country, for instance, that we have here. That's the Respondee panel in Germany, whereas the other results were for Spain or for Latin American countries. So if we try to sum up for visual data, it seems that we have some evidence that support the idea of higher skills and higher willingness to produce and share visual data within the frame of web survey for millennials compared to the older age cohorts. But the actual participation is low, it's lower than what we expected. And the reported levels in particular of like are really, really low. So it's not so encouraging and promising maybe as for emojis here, but I do think that we really need more research before saying that it's not working. So we need to look at different samples, countries, types of visual data, topics, so maybe less sensitive ones. And also I think that an important element is the tool, exact tool that is used for collecting the visual data. So in the studies that had such a low level of like, the tool that was used to collect the data was the survey image tool that was developed by Ono and colleague. And this tool is actually available. It's online, it's for free. So if you're interested in including visual data in your survey, you can go to the link that is on the slide and you can find the code and you can adapt that to your survey software. And this tool actually was quite easy to use in principle. As you can see, there is the logo, you click there and you directly can search for the file that you want or take the photo that you need. But maybe there is still improvements, rooms for improvements in terms of tool. And actually we have been working on that, and we I've developed a tool that is called Web Data Visual, and that will be very soon available also online. So similarly to the first one, if you go to the website here, you will have the code and you will be able to adapt that to your survey software. And what we try to do here is to propose more alternatives to the respondents. So instead of just having to look in their folder, they can also copy paste or they can drag and drop the files. So we try to provide different alternatives with the hope that that could improve their experience and make the participation actually a bit higher. Now, last idea would be the voice option. So why focusing on voice recordings? Again, voice messages are largely used outside surveys. A few days ago, actually, WhatsApp just published a report in which they mentioned that every day there are 7 billion voice messages that are sent on WhatsApp. And as for visual data, we do expect that there are several possible benefits if we propose this tool also in web survey, both on the researcher side, so for improving data quality mainly, but also on the respondent side, which means mainly making the survey more natural, more in the way that they are used to communicate outside the survey world. So it could be at the end less time and effort and more enjoyable. And again, we expect that especially for millennials, because they have the skills and they are used to the new technologies. And there are actually some reports that are not academic again, they are more from market ideas. But the title, for instance, of this report is that the next billion mobile users will rely on video and voice. So maybe actually the studies I presented before about visual data were done a bit too early, and we need to wait a bit more before people get even more used to that. But it seems really that there is this trend toward both video and voice being more and more common for people in their normal life at least. So we can see if this also works for surveys. In terms of empirical evidence, in that case, I didn't know of any study that would focus only on millennials when asking to share voice data. But I did have access to the data from 2 studies that were asking for voice recordings and information about age. So I could compare millennials to older age cohorts on different aspects. In the first study, I had information about the proportion that said that they did not manage to use the voice tool, and the proportion that said that they like using it when they could manage. So I test for difference again between millennials and older age cohorts, and this time the data comes again from the NetQuest online panel in Spain, and we had 6 questions that were requesting about voice answer. The design was overall quite complex for this study, but now I'm focusing on the 400 respondents that were answering from Android smartphone. And the main findings are actually that the results go in the expected direction when we compare millennials versus Gen X, but the difference are not significant. And we had actually very few boomers, since already the number of respondents was quite low. So it's difficult to conclude about this group. But overall, the level of like was also quite low, even if it's better than what we got for the visual data and that we have seen before. So more precisely, the millennials, there were around 14% that say that they did not manage to use the tool. So this is quite similar, but a bit lower than what we had for the visual data. And we have around 35% that said that they like using the tool, and none of the difference with the older age cohorts are significant. And I also had data from another study where we follow up the first study. So we ask similar questions again, but now we had information about if they like using this specific tool for sharing their voice recording and if they find it easy. And the data is again from the NetQuest opt-in online panel, but now we have only 3 questions that were requesting for voice answers, and the number of respondents that are answering from Android smartphone is much higher. It's around 1,600. The main finding are again that there are no significant difference between millennials and older age cohorts, and that overall the level of like is quite low, but still higher again than what we had for visual data. And the proportion that find it easy is actually relatively high. So more precisely, we have around 27% of millennials that say that they like using the tool, and around 65% that say that they find it easy. So that's much better than what we had in the case of the visual data. But overall, still there is no clear evidence that it would really improve the overall engagement of millennials to use voice recordings, because the levels of people that like it are still clearly not a majority. And again, we need more research. Therefore, no, I think it's too early to say just that it's not working, but we need to do more research. We need to test on different samples, on probability-based samples, not just on opt-in in different countries. We also need to look at different topics. And once more, I think that also we need to take into account the tool, exact tool that we are using, because when we ask people if they like and if they find it easy, their experience is really depending very much on how the tool is working. And as before, there are at least 2 tools that are available or will be very soon, and that you can use if you want to include also voice recordings in your survey. So the code is available and you can just adapt that to your survey software. One is again by Oln and colleagues, and it's called Survey Voice. And the other one is the one that we developed, Web Data Voice, and that is not completely finished, but very soon it will be also online. And both tools actually have a big advantage compared to the tool that was used in the results that I've been reporting, because in the results I've reported, we used the tool of the NetQuest online fieldwork company. And this tool was actually asking for permission to the microphone. And this was often quite complicated for the respondents. So we had very long instruction, and it was quite complicated sometimes to manage to give the permission. On the contrary, both tools that are now freely available do not have this problem of permission of the microphone, so they are much easier to use in principle. So we do expect that if we use this tool, we should have less problem of people not managing to use the tool, and that it could also improve their survey experience. So to finally summarize in this presentation, I first look at the participation of millennials compared to older age cohorts using data from 2 probability-based panels, the CRONOS and the G panel in 4 different countries overall. And I do find, combining conclusions from the descriptive and from the regression analysis, that there is a lower participation rate for millennials, then that there is more break-off for millennials and higher smartphone participation. Now, in order to try to improve the engagement overall of millennials in surveys, it seems to be lower than for the older age cohorts. I went through 3 ideas that have been mentioned in the literature as potentially helping engaging millennials, which are the emojis, visual data, and voice recordings. In terms of emojis, we only have evidence from 1 study, but they are quite promising results, even if we would need, of course, more research and at least to compare also to other age cohorts. In terms of visual data, the results are more mixed with the existing data that I presented. But again, I think we really need more research. And in terms of voice recording, we didn't find strong support or no support for also the idea that this would really be helping. But again, I think we really need more research. In particular, in the case of voice recording, I think the tool here probably plays an important role, and we really need to do some analysis with different tools and not the one that are presented today. And also, I think we really need further research that is doing or looking at different kinds of samples, because here we are only focusing on opt-in panels. So people, for the second part, no, so people are really used to answer survey in a certain way. And actually, when we introduce changes in the way they are used to, this might make it more difficult because they are so used to answer surveys. So NetQuest panelists or Respondee panelists, they are sometimes answering more than 1 survey a week. So they are really, really used to a certain way of answering survey. And I think that as soon as we propose something different, actually, this might not be seen so positively because they are used to the rest and they like the rest if they are still in the panel, otherwise they would have dropped from the panel, no? So probably the advantages that we may have with these new tools and that we do not really see maybe in these results, it might be because we are not focusing on the right kind of population, no? That people that are not participating nowadays to survey, maybe they would start participating if we would propose this tool that they like better. But the one that already participate, it's because they already like somehow the way it is done. So we do not need maybe so much to convince them with different things. It's not 100% that, because if we have higher break-off, the break-off is really happening with people that already started and that are in the panel and that are used to that. No, so there is part here that could be improved. But I think it's also important that we try this kind of new tools on different kinds of samples where we have people that are not so used to the way that it's working currently in opt-in panels. No? And that's all I have for today. So if you have any question, I'm very happy to answer them now. You also have my emails, so you can also send questions later if you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Melanie, for a really interesting presentation. I can see people starting to put some questions into the Q&A, which I'll read out for you. But I had an initial question, which was around how you talked about participation and how you saw these differences in participation in the survey. But how does that relate to how questions are presented to people? So people are being invited to take part in a survey, but they can't see the questionnaire at that point, so they have no sense of what it might look like. So how does participation relate to these different changes to the way in which questions are presented to people?
Yeah, so we look actually at the participation over many surveys within the same panel. No? So the way that questions are presented in one survey, if they start participating and they don't like it, can affect the decision to participate in the next survey that they are invited to. No? So that's a bit the last point I try to make. So it would really be interesting also to see people that do not start participating in this panel, how they react when from the beginning, they get a survey that is maybe better designed or designed in a way that they like more. But now we are dealing with people that are within panels. So when they get an experience, they have this as a reference for the next participations. No? And if we change something, they may also do not like it because they are not used. And in previous participation, it was not done that way. So it's different and it makes it more difficult because they were used to another way, no, for instance.
Great. Thank you very much. So there's a question from Sierra at NatCen. The millennial cohort has a broad age range, and given how technology has accelerated during the 1980s and 90s, within millennials, you've got adopters and natives of digital technology. In your research, have you looked at breaking down the millennial cohort further? I think particularly around emojis, there would be big differences between those born in the 1980s and those born, say, in the 2000s.
Yeah, I think that's completely true. We didn't do it, but I completely agree because I'm a millennial, but when I look at how they describe millennials very often, I do not really feel like millennial. No? I would be like at the border maybe. And also, as I said very quickly, but in the first slide, actually the definition of millennial changed a little bit depending on the source where you are looking. So actually some people may switch from one category to the other, just the 2 years around the 80s. No? So I think it would be actually completely true. Interesting to look more in details between like young millennials and old millennials like me. No?
Great, thank you. A question from Marta. What was the topic and length of the survey used in the Revilla and Holm 2020 research that you mentioned? Was an unconditional incentive used? What were the upper and lower cutoff points age-wise for millennials?
Okay, so in the study that I presented, we used this CRONOS and the JIP panel. So it's not just one survey, but we have 6 waves of survey in each case, and even a welcome survey in the case of the CRONOS panel. The surveys were always around 20-25 minutes. They're always that ways in these panels. And they have different topics in different ways, but they are mainly social science topics. No? So they are mainly about opinions and attitudes. And we also have quite some socio-demographic questions. And questions about the survey experience are also very common at the end of these waves in both panels. No? So that's what we have. The incentive is different in the two panels. So in one of them, it's conditional, and in the other, it's unconditional. And the cutoff point for the millennials are the ones I presented at the very beginning. So it's from 82 to 2003.
Great, thank you very much. And a question from Andrew. Have you seen any differences in behaviours and preferences between older and younger millennials and even Gen Z?
Thanks. So again, we didn't look yet for younger and older millennials. I think that's really an interesting follow-up. So we may do it in the next weeks or months, but so far we didn't do it. And Gen Z is actually not present in my presentation because it was not yet in surveys when we got the data. No? So millennials aren't in the people that were born in 2003, which means that now they are 19. So normally they started participating in this kind of survey that are only for adults just last year. No? So the data are at least 1 or 2 years old. So it means that we didn't add this population in the classic adult population surveys. So I think that will be something for the next years to come, but it was not yet something that we had in our data.
Great, and I can see a question from Isabella. It's gender, is it distinctive variable in your results? Did you look at gender?
Well, we did control for gender when we did the regression, but right now I would not remember because in the slides I only focused on the effects of the variable for the age, so I didn't put the control variable. So I will have to check again if the effect was or not positive for gender. I don't remember, but we do control for that.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions for Melanie? Deirdre, what do you think of offering the option of audio reading out questions and voice or text recording of answers?
Well, I think that's something that is interesting also to study. Now it's a good complement because now if they can speak, that's can be, for instance, a good solution for people that have low literacy level, but if they still need to read the question, that's not sufficient. No? So the fact that they can speak if the questions are not also read out is not sufficient for involving, for instance, children or population with low level of literacy in general, which in some country might be really relevant. So the combination of both, I think it's really interesting. And I know some colleagues like Jan are working in that direction. And I think that's a very interesting research for the future.
So there's a question from Francis, who says it's a very interesting presentation. Would this approach end up substituting problems with response rates for problems with coding, perhaps apart from emojis used for short Likert scales?
Well, I think we do have more problems if we try to use this kind of data. Now, in particular, the visual data, but also the voice data, you need to extract the information from there indeed. And the step of extracting the information might be really complicated, and depending how you do it, the quality of the information that you get at the end might be better or not. So if you get visual data, but you do not extract properly the information, you can actually lose in terms of quality instead of gaining. No? So that's one more step that researchers will need to learn how to do well, such that we can really observe the gain that we would expect, no, in terms of quality. And for voice, I think we do not have so much more to do because the voice transcription is already working quite well in terms of transcripting the voice recording in text. And then you have actually an answer that is similar to what you get when you have conventional open narrative questions. So you still need coding, but it's not a new thing. It's something that we already had in the past. No? And I think that might be more difficult, but also that machine learning is making a lot of progress in that direction, and automatized ways of codifying or classifying information from images is becoming each time better. No? So it's also a nice way, no? But because we have these new tools, but they come also with new knowledge about how to analyze big amount of data that are not typical data. So for instance, visual data. And each time it becomes easier to apply this kind of algorithm that already exists and customize them for your own data, such that you can extract the information in a way that is quite efficient, quite accurate, and let's say that normal researcher could do without being really a programmer, for instance. No?